In the quiet depths of night, a family's world is turned upside down when unexpected sounds lead to a discovery in the attic. What begins as a simple investigation evolves into a journey of healing, bonding, and uncovering long-buried secrets. As Lisa navigates her role as a stepmother to Jake and Emily, they embark on a shared adventure that will test their relationships and reveal truths about their past. With each visit to the local airport and every memory shared, they inch closer to a revelation that will change everything they thought they knew about their family history. If you love your family and want to listen to amazing and shocking stories, click on subscribe and avoid 20 years of bad luck in your life. Now, let's begin the story. The old house creaked and settled in the stillness of the night. Lisa's eyes snapped open, her heart quickening as she registered an unfamiliar sound. It wasn't the usual settling of the house or the whisper of wind through the trees outside. No, this was different. A muffled thump followed by hushed whispers coming from above. Sitting up in bed, Lisa glanced at the empty space beside her. A pang of loneliness hitting her, as it always did when she remembered her husband was gone. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet touching the cool wooden floor. The sound came again, definitely from the attic. Jake and Emily. It had to be them. But what were they doing up there at this hour? Lisa's mind raced with possibilities, each more concerning than the last. Were they getting into trouble? Or worse, were they in danger? She stood, wrapping her robe tightly around herself, as if it could shield her from whatever she might find. The hallway was dark as she made her way to the stairs leading to the attic. Each step creaked under her weight, the sound seeming to echo in the quiet house. As she climbed, Lisa's thoughts drifted to how different life had become since her husband's passing. The kids had been struggling, she knew. Jake had become more withdrawn, while Emily's cheerful demeanor seemed forced at times. And Lisa? She was doing her best to hold it all together, to be the strong one, but some days it felt like she was barely treading water. Reaching the attic door, Lisa paused, her hand on the knob. She could hear muffled voices now, punctuated by occasional laughter. It didn't sound like they were in distress, but curiosity and concern propelled her forward. Taking a deep breath, she turned the knob and pushed the door open. The scene that greeted her was far from what she had expected. The attic was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting long shadows across the cluttered space. But there, in the middle of it all, sat Jake and Emily, surrounded by what looked like miniature airplanes and tiny bottles of paint. They looked up as the door opened, their faces a mixture of surprise and guilt at being caught. But there was something else there too, a lightness Lisa hadn't seen in weeks. Jake held a half-assembled plane in his hands, while Emily was carefully applying a stripe of blue paint to a completed model. "What's going on up here?" Lisa asked, her voice soft with relief and curiosity. Jake and Emily exchanged a glance before Jake spoke. "We couldn't sleep," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We found Dad's old model airplane kits and thought maybe we could finish them for him." Emily nodded, adding, "We were telling stories about Dad. Remember when he used to take us to the airport just to watch the planes take off?" Lisa felt a lump form in her throat. She did remember. Those had been some of their happiest family moments before the illness took him away. She stepped further into the attic, taking in the scene more fully. Scattered around the kids were old photographs, bits of paper with scribbled notes, and several completed model airplanes. "Can I join you?" Lisa asked, surprising even herself with the question. The siblings looked at each other again, a silent conversation passing between them. Then Emily smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Sure," she said, patting the space next to her. "We were just about to start on the P-51 Mustang. Dad always said it was his favorite." As Lisa settled down next to the children, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. This wasn't how she had expected the night to go, but somehow, surrounded by memories and the quiet industry of Jake and Emily, she felt more at peace than she had in months. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the soft brush of sandpaper and the occasional click of plastic parts fitting together. Lisa found herself relaxing, her earlier anxiety melting away as she focused on the delicate task of assembling a tiny propeller. It was Jake who broke the silence, his voice hesitant at first, but growing stronger as he spoke. "You know, Dad used to say that building these models was like putting together pieces of a dream. He'd tell us stories about each plane as we worked." Emily chimed in, her eyes bright with remembered joy. "Oh yeah, remember the time he told us about the Spitfire and how it helped win the Battle of Britain? He made it sound so exciting." Lisa smiled, grateful for this glimpse into the bond her husband had shared with his children. "Your father had a way with stories," she said softly. "He could make anything sound like an adventure." As they continued to work, more stories flowed. Jake and Emily took turns sharing memories of their father. Camping trips where he'd point out constellations, Sunday morning pancake battles, and the time he tried, and hilariously failed, to build a treehouse in the backyard. Lisa listened, her heart both heavy and light. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear these stories, to be reminded of the man she'd loved and the father he'd been to these amazing kids. And as she watched Jake and Emily laugh and reminisce, she saw a spark of healing beginning to take hold. The night wore on, but none of them felt tired. They were too engrossed in their task, in the shared memories, in the feeling of connection that had been missing for so long. As the first hints of dawn began to creep through the attic's small window, Lisa realized that something had shifted. The attic, once just a storage space for forgotten things, had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where memories could be honored and new bonds could form. She looked at Jake and Emily, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of morning light, and felt a surge of love and protectiveness. They were all still grieving, still finding their way in this new reality, but for the first time in months, Lisa felt a glimmer of hope. Together, surrounded by the tangible reminders of the man they'd all loved, they were taking the first steps toward healing. As they began to pack up their supplies, Lisa made a silent promise to herself and to her husband's memory. She would nurture this newfound connection, would help Jake and Emily hold on to the joy of their father's memory while finding a way to move forward. The attic, with its treasures and memories, would become a special place for all of them, a place to remember, to create, and to grow together as a family. As the early morning light filtered through the dusty attic window, Lisa found herself reluctant to end this unexpected moment of connection. She watched as Jake carefully placed the newly assembled model airplane on a shelf, his movements gentle and reverent. "You know," Lisa began, her voice slightly hesitant, "we could make this a regular thing if you'd like. Maybe every weekend we could come up here and work on these models together." Jake and Emily exchanged glances, a mix of surprise and curiosity on their faces. It was Emily who spoke first, her voice tinged with cautious excitement. "Really? You'd want to do that with us?" Lisa nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at the children's reaction. "Of course. I'd love to learn more about these planes and about the stories your dad used to tell." Jake, who had been quiet for a moment, suddenly perked up. "Hey, do you remember when Dad used to take us to the airport on Sundays? We'd get ice cream and watch the planes take off." The memory hit Lisa like a gentle wave, bringing with it a bittersweet smile. "I do remember that," she said softly. "Your dad always had this look of wonder on his face, like each plane was carrying a piece of his dreams with it." Emily giggled, her eyes bright with the recalled memory. "And he'd make up stories about where each plane was going. Remember the time he convinced us That the little propeller plane was actually Santa's summer vacation transport? The three of them laughed, the sound filling the attic with a warmth that had been missing for too long. As their laughter subsided, Lisa found herself curious about what other memories the children held close to their hearts. "What else do you remember about your dad?" she asked gently, settling back down on the floor and patting the space beside her invitingly. "I'd love to hear more." Jake and Emily needed no further encouragement. They sat down, forming a small circle with Lisa, and began to share their favorite memories of their father. Jake started, his voice growing animated as he spoke. "There was this one time when Dad tried to teach us how to fly a kite. He was so excited about it, said it was the closest thing to piloting a plane without leaving the ground." Emily chimed in, laughing. "Oh yeah, and he got the kite stuck in Mrs. Henderson's oak tree. Remember how he climbed up to get it, and his pants got caught on a branch?" Lisa found herself laughing along, picturing her husband dangling from a tree branch, his face a mix of embarrassment and determination. These were the stories she treasured, the ones that painted a picture of the man she'd loved in all his imperfect, wonderful glory. "He never did things halfway, did he?" Lisa mused, her voice warm with affection. "Whether it was flying kites or building model planes, he threw himself into it completely." Jake nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "That's why I want to finish these models," he said, gesturing to the unfinished kits scattered around them. "It feels like I'm connecting with him somehow." Emily reached out and squeezed her brother's hand, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Lisa felt a lump form in her throat at the gesture, touched by the bond the siblings shared. "Your dad would be so proud of you both," Lisa said softly. "The way you're honoring his memory, keeping his passions alive. It's beautiful." As the conversation continued, Lisa found herself sharing some of her own memories of her late husband. She told them about their first date, how he'd taken her to an air show, and spent the entire time explaining the different types of planes with such enthusiasm that she couldn't help but fall a little bit in love right then and there. Jake and Emily listened with rapt attention, soaking in these new details about their father's life. It struck Lisa how hungry they were for these stories, how much they needed to keep their father's memory alive. As the morning wore on, their conversation drifted to other topics. Jake talked about a school project he was working on, designing a paper airplane that could fly farther than anyone else's. Emily shared her dream of becoming a pilot someday, her eyes shining with determination as she spoke. Lisa listened, her heart swelling with pride and love for these remarkable children. She realized that in sharing these memories, in working on these models together, they were building something new. It wasn't just about preserving the past. It was about forging a new kind of family bond, one that honored their shared loss while looking toward the future. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, signaling the start of a new day, Lisa made a decision. "How about we make pancakes for breakfast?" she suggested. "Your dad's special recipe, and while we eat, we can plan our next model building session." The kids' faces lit up at the suggestion, and as they made their way down from the attic, Lisa felt a sense of peace settle over her. The grief was still there, a constant ache in her heart, but it was accompanied now by something else. Hope. Hope for healing, for new beginnings, and for the family they were becoming. As they entered the kitchen, the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of Jake and Emily's excited chatter filling the air, Lisa knew that they had taken an important step forward. The attic, once a place of forgotten things, had become a sanctuary of memories and new possibilities. And Lisa was determined to nurture this newfound connection, to help Jake and Emily navigate their grief while building a future filled with love and shared experiences. With flour-dusted hands and hearts full of bittersweet memories, they began to make breakfast together, the first of many such mornings to come. The model airplanes in the attic would wait, silent witnesses to a family finding its way back to joy. One memory, one pancake, one shared moment at a time. As they settled around the kitchen table, the aroma of freshly made pancakes filled the air. Lisa watched Jake and Emily dig into their breakfast with enthusiasm, a small smile playing on her lips. The morning's unexpected connection in the attic had shifted something in their family dynamic, and she could feel it in the comfortable silence that now enveloped them. Halfway through his stack of pancakes, Jake paused, his fork hovering mid-air. "You know," he began, his voice hesitant but determined, "there's something else we haven't told you about, Lisa." Emily's eyes widened slightly, and she gave her brother a quick nod of encouragement. Lisa felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach, but kept her expression open and curious. "What is it, Jake?" she asked gently. Jake put down his fork and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, well-worn notebook. "We've been writing letters," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "To Dad." Lisa's breath caught in her throat. She looked from Jake to Emily, seeing the mixture of vulnerability and hope in their eyes. "Letters?" she repeated softly, encouraging them to continue. Emily nodded, reaching out to touch the notebook in Jake's hands. "We started doing it a few weeks after the funeral," she explained. "It helps sometimes when we really miss him or when something happens that we wish we could tell him about." Jake carefully opened the notebook, revealing pages filled with childish handwriting. Do you want to read one?" he offered, his voice trembling slightly. Lisa felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back, not wanting to overwhelm the children with her own emotions. "I'd be honored," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Jake flipped through the pages before settling on one. He cleared his throat and began to read. "Dear Dad, I miss you so much it hurts sometimes. Today at school, we had a science fair, and I made a model of the solar system. I kept thinking about how you would have loved to help me with it, how you would have made sure Jupiter was just the right size, and that Saturn's rings were perfect. I won second place, Dad. I wish you could have been there to see it. Emily says you probably were watching from heaven, but sometimes that's hard to believe. I hope she's right, though. Love, Jake." As Jake finished reading, a heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Lisa felt her heart breaking all over again, not just for her own loss, but for the depth of pain these children were carrying. She reached out, gently taking the notebook from Jake's hands. "May I?" she asked, and when both children nodded, she began to read more of their letters. Some were happy, recounting achievements or funny moments they wished they could share with their father. Others were heartbreakingly sad, full of the raw grief that comes from losing a parent far too soon. As she read, Lisa felt a fierce protectiveness wash over her. These children, her stepchildren, had been carrying this weight alone for so long. She looked up at them, seeing the vulnerability in their eyes, the fear of judgment or dismissal. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Thank you for sharing this with me. It's beautiful what you're doing. And I think your dad would be so proud of you both." Emily's lower lip trembled. "Do you really think so?" she asked, her voice small. Lisa nodded emphatically. "I know so. You're keeping his memory alive in such a special way. And you know what? I think this is something we could all do together." Jake's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You mean, you want to write letters too?" "If that's okay with you both," Lisa said carefully. "We could make it a family project. Maybe once a week we could sit down together and write our letters. We could share them if we want to, or keep them private. What do you think?" The siblings exchanged a look, having one of their silent conversations. After a moment, they both nodded. "I think Dad would like that," Emily said softly. "He always did say that family was the most important thing," Jake added, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Lisa felt a warmth spread through her chest, This was more than just a way to remember their father. It was a chance to bridge the gap that had formed between them all since his passing. "Then it's settled," she said, reaching out to squeeze both of their hands. "We'll start tonight." As they finished their breakfast, the conversation turned to lighter topics: school projects, upcoming events, and plans for the weekend. But there was a new undercurrent of understanding between them, a shared secret that bound them together. Later that evening, as they sat in the living room with pens and paper, ready to write their first letters as a family, Lisa looked at Jake and Emily. She saw the sadness in their eyes, yes, but also a glimmer of hope. They were taking a step forward together, honoring the past while building a new future. As Lisa put pen to paper, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. "Dear Tom," she began, and the words flowed easily after that. She wrote about the children, about their strength and resilience. She wrote about her own struggles and triumphs as she navigated this new role of stepmother and widow. And she wrote about love, the love that still bound them all together, even across the divide of life and death. When they finished writing, they sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts and memories. But as Lisa looked at Jake and Emily, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time: a spark of joy, a lightness in their expressions that had been missing for too long. They were still grieving, still healing, but they were doing it together now. And as they placed their letters in a special box they had decorated earlier, Lisa knew that they had taken an important step towards becoming not just a family bound by loss, but one united by love, memory, and hope for the future. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to their household. True to their word, Lisa, Jake, and Emily made their weekly letter-writing sessions a cherished ritual. But it was their monthly visits to the local airport that truly began to transform their family dynamic. On a crisp Saturday morning, Lisa pulled into the airport parking lot, her heart beating with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This was their first visit since making it a regular family outing, and she couldn't help but wonder how the kids would react. "Look," Emily exclaimed as they walked towards the observation area. "They have remote-controlled planes over there." Jake's eyes lit up, following his sister's pointing finger to a group of enthusiasts flying miniature aircraft in a designated area near the runway. Lisa watched as both children pressed their faces against the chain-link fence, their expressions a mix of wonder and longing. "Can we go closer?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with an enthusiasm Lisa hadn't heard in months. "Of course," Lisa replied, guiding them towards the RC plane area. As they approached, an older man with weathered hands and kind eyes looked up from his controller, offering them a warm smile. "First time seeing the RC planes?" he asked, his eyes twinkling. Jake nodded eagerly. "Our dad used to bring us to watch the real planes, but we've never seen these up close before." The man's smile softened. "Well, you're in for a treat then. Name's Thompson, retired pilot. How about I show you kids how these beauties work?" For the next hour, Mr. Thompson patiently explained the intricacies of remote-controlled flight, even allowing Jake and Emily to try their hand at the controls under his watchful guidance. Lisa stood back, watching the scene unfold with a lump in her throat. The joy on the children's faces was something she hadn't seen since before their father's passing. As the morning wore on, Mr. Thompson's stories shifted from RC planes to his experiences as a pilot. Jake and Emily listened with rapt attention, their eyes wide as he recounted tales of flying through storms and navigating by the stars. "You know," Mr. Thompson said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "flying isn't just about the thrill or the technology. It's about freedom, about pushing boundaries. Your dad understood that, didn't he?" Jake and Emily exchanged a surprised look. "You knew our dad?" Emily asked, her voice hushed. Mr. Thompson nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. "Tom was a good man. We flew together a few times back in the day. He had a passion for aviation that was contagious. Lisa felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't expected to encounter someone who knew Tom, especially not here. But as she watched the children's faces light up with curiosity, she realized what a gift this unexpected connection could be. "Would you tell us about him?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "About what he was like as a pilot?" Mr. Thompson's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "I'd be honored," he said, settling back in his chair. "Your dad, he had a way of making everyone around him feel like they could touch the sky." As Mr. Thompson began to share stories about their father's early days as a pilot, Lisa watched Jake and Emily lean in, hanging on every word. She saw a spark in their eyes that had been missing for so long, a connection to their father that went beyond memories and into a world he had loved. The morning stretched into afternoon, filled with stories, laughter, and the occasional roar of a plane taking off overhead. As they prepared to leave, Mr. Thompson pulled Lisa aside. "You've got some special kids there," he said softly. "Tom would be proud of how they're carrying on his love for flying." Lisa felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means more to them, to all of us, than you could know." Mr. Thompson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Listen," he said, "I've got a small Cessna. If you're comfortable with it, I'd love to take Jake up for a short flight sometime. Emily too, when she's a bit older. Let them experience what their dad loved so much." Lisa felt a moment of panic at the thought, but as she looked over at Jake and Emily, still buzzing with excitement from the morning's adventures, she knew what her answer had to be. "I think Tom would have wanted that," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside her. "We'd be honored, Mr. Thompson." As they drove home, the car filled with excited chatter about RC planes and the promise of future flights, Lisa felt a weight lift from her shoulders. This visit to the airport had done more than just provide a fun outing. It had given Jake and Emily a tangible connection to their father's passion, a way to keep his memory alive that went beyond photographs and stories. She glanced in the rearview mirror, catching sight of Jake's animated expression as he described to Emily how it felt to control the RC plane. In that moment, Lisa knew they had stumbled upon something precious, a way to honor Tom's memory while also moving forward as a family. As they pulled into their driveway, Lisa made a silent promise to herself and to Tom's memory. She would nurture this newfound passion in the children, would help them explore the world their father had loved so much. It wouldn't always be easy, and the pain of loss would never fully disappear, but in this shared adventure, they had found a path forward, together. The day of Jake's first flight arrived sooner than Lisa had anticipated. As they drove to the airport, an anxious silence filled the car. Jake sat in the back seat, his hands fidgeting with the zipper of his jacket, while Emily pressed her face against the window, her expression a mix of excitement and envy. Lisa's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as she navigated the familiar route to the airport. She couldn't shake the nagging worry in the pit of her stomach. Was she doing the right thing? Would Tom have approved of this decision? As they pulled into the parking lot, Lisa took a deep breath, forcing a smile as she turned to face the children. "Ready for your big adventure, Jake?" Jake nodded, his face a palette of emotions, nervousness, excitement, and something deeper that Lisa couldn't quite place. "I think so," he said softly. I wish Dad was here to see this." Lisa felt her heart constrict at his words. She reached back and squeezed his hand. "He is here, Jake, in spirit. And I know he'd be so proud of you for doing this." They made their way to the small hangar where Mr. Thompson was waiting, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile as he saw them approach. "There's our young pilot," he called out, waving them over. As Mr. Thompson began to explain the pre-flight checklist to Jake, Lisa pulled Emily aside. "How are you doing, sweetie?" she asked, noticing the girl's slightly downcast expression. Emily shrugged, her eyes fixed on Jake and Mr. Thompson. "I'm happy for Jake," she said, her voice small. "I just wish I could go too." Lisa knelt down to Emily's level, meeting her eyes. "Your turn will come, Em, I promise. And for now, you get to be Jake's biggest cheerleader. That's an important job too, you know." Emily's face brightened a little at this. "Yeah, I guess you're right," she said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. As Jake climbed into the small Cessna, Lisa felt her heart racing. She watched as Mr. Thompson helped him with his headset and began explaining the various instruments on the dashboard. Jake's eyes were wide, taking in every detail with an intensity that reminded Lisa so much of Tom. "Mom?" Jake called out just before Mr. Thompson closed the door. I love you." Lisa felt tears prick at her eyes. "I love you too, sweetheart. Have an amazing time up there." As the plane taxied down the runway, Lisa and Emily stood hand in hand, watching as it grew smaller and smaller before finally lifting off the ground. Emily squeezed Lisa's hand tightly. "He's really flying," she whispered, awe evident in her voice. For what felt like hours, but was really only about 30 minutes, Lisa and Emily waited, their eyes scanning the sky for any sign of the small plane. When they finally heard the distant hum of the engine returning, Lisa felt a wave of relief wash over her. The plane touched down smoothly, taxiing back to where they stood waiting. As soon as the door opened, Jake burst out, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, Emily, that was... He struggled to find the words, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Lisa pulled him into a tight hug, feeling his heart racing against her chest. "It was amazing," Jake finally managed to say, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I felt like Dad was right there with me." As Jake recounted every detail of the flight to an enraptured Emily, Lisa turned to Mr. Thompson. "Thank you," she said softly. "This means more than you could know." Mr. Thompson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Tom would be proud," he said simply. "That boy's got flying in his blood, just like his dad." On the drive home, the car was filled with excited chatter as Jake described every moment of the flight to Emily. Lisa listened, her heart full. She could hear the change in Jake's voice, the newfound confidence and joy that seemed to radiate from him. As they pulled into their driveway, Jake suddenly grew quiet. "Mom," he said, his voice serious, I think I want to be a pilot when I grow up, like Dad." Lisa felt a lump form in her throat. She turned to look at Jake, seeing the determination in his eyes. "If that's what you want, sweetheart, we'll make it happen," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. That night, as Lisa tucked the children into bed, she noticed Jake clutching something in his hand. It was the small notebook where they wrote their letters to Tom. "I want to write to Dad about today," Jake explained, his eyes already heavy with sleep. Lisa nodded, kissing his forehead. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she said softly. Later, as she sat in the quiet of the living room, Lisa found herself reaching for her own notebook. She began to write, her pen moving swiftly across the page. "Dear Tom, today, our son flew. Not just in a plane, but towards a future that honors your memory in the most beautiful way. I wish you could have seen his face when he landed. It was like seeing you all over again. That same light in his eyes that you always had when you talked about flying. I know we're still finding our way without you, but today felt like a turning point. Jake and Emily are carrying your passion forward, each in their own way, and I promise you, I'll do everything I can to nurture that spark in them. We miss you, always. But today, it felt like you were right here with us, soaring through the clouds and showing our children that the sky's the limit. All my love, Lisa." As she closed the notebook, Lisa felt a sense of peace wash over her. They were moving forward, step by step, finding new ways to keep Tom's memory alive while also charting their own course as a family. And somewhere, she was sure, Tom was watching over them, his heart soaring just as high as Jake had today. As the months passed, Lisa found herself marveling at the transformation within their family. The shared experiences at the airport and their continued letter-writing sessions had created a bond that grew stronger with each passing day. Yet, despite the progress, Lisa couldn't shake the lingering doubts that crept in during quiet moments. One evening, as she prepared dinner, Lisa overheard Jake and Emily in the living room, their voices animated as they discussed their latest visit to the airport. "Mr. Thompson said I could start ground school next year if Mom agrees," Jake was saying, excitement evident in his voice. "Can you imagine me, actually learning to fly?" Emily's response was enthusiastic, but tinged with a hint of something else. "That's amazing, Jake. I wonder if Dad would have let us do all this if he were still here." Lisa's hands stilled over the cutting board, her heart clenching at Emily's words. It was a question she'd asked herself countless times over the past months. Was she doing right by Tom's memory? Would he approve of the path they were on? Taking a deep breath, Lisa made her way to the living room, leaning against the doorframe as she watched the siblings. They looked up as she entered, their expressions a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "Hey, you two," Lisa said softly. "I couldn't help overhearing. Jake, we can definitely discuss ground school. And Emily, I think it's okay to wonder about what Dad would think. In fact, why don't we talk about it?" The children exchanged glances before nodding. Lisa settled onto the couch between them, feeling the weight of the moment. "You know," she began, her voice gentle, "your dad loved flying more than almost anything in this world. But do you know what he loved even more?" She paused, looking at each of them in turn. "You. Both of you." Jake's brow furrowed. "But then why didn't he ever take us flying? I mean, before—" Lisa took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. "Your dad, he had his reasons, but I know that more than anything, he wanted you both to follow your passions, wherever they might lead you." Emily leaned into Lisa's side. "Even if those passions are different from his?" Lisa wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Especially then. Your dad believed in the power of dreams, in the importance of finding your own path." As they sat there, the three of them huddled together on the couch, Lisa felt a sudden urge to share more of herself, to bridge the gap that still sometimes yawned between stepmother and stepchildren. "You know," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I have my own memories of your dad and his love for flying. Did I ever tell you about our first date?" Jake and Emily shook their heads, their eyes wide with curiosity. Lisa smiled, lost in the memory. "He took me to an air show. I thought it was the strangest first date idea, but the moment we got there, I understood." Your dad's eyes lit up like I'd never seen before. He spent the entire day explaining every plane, every maneuver, with such passion that I couldn't help but fall in love. Not just with him, but with the world he was sharing with me. She paused, feeling the familiar ache of loss, but also a warmth at the memory. That's the thing about your dad. He didn't just love flying for himself. He loved sharing that love, inspiring others to find their own passions. Jake nodded slowly. "So, you think he'd be okay with me wanting to be a pilot?" Lisa squeezed his shoulder. "I think he'd be over the moon, sweetheart. And Emily," she turned to the younger child, "I think he'd be just as proud of your interest in the engineering side of things. Remember how excited you were about that model engine kit last week?" Emily's face lit up. "Yeah, it was so cool. I've been reading more about how plane engines work since then." Lisa felt a surge of pride and love for these remarkable children. You're both carrying on your dad's legacy in your own unique ways. And I want you to know that I'm here to support you, every step of the way." There was a moment of silence as her words sank in. Then, unexpectedly, both children leaned in, enveloping Lisa in a tight hug. She felt tears prick at her eyes as she held them close. "We love you, Mom," Jake murmured, his voice muffled against her shoulder. It was the first time he had called her that, and Lisa felt her heart swell with emotion. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Both of you, so much." As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, Lisa felt a shift in the air around them. The invisible barriers that had lingered, the unspoken fears and doubts, seemed to dissolve. In that moment, they weren't a stepmother and her husband's children. They were simply a family, bound by love, shared grief, and the promise of a future they would navigate together. Later that night, as Lisa tucked the children into bed, she noticed a new lightness in their expressions, a peace that hadn't been there before. And as she settled into her own bed, she found herself reaching for the notebook where she kept her letters to Tom. "Dear Tom," she wrote, her pen moving swiftly across the page. "Today, I think we truly became a family. Your children are so strong, so brave, and they carry your spirit with them in ways that take my breath away. I promise you, I'll nurture their dreams, support their passions, and love them with every fiber of my being. We're finding our way, Tom, step by step. And somehow, I know you're right here with us, every moment of the journey." As she closed the notebook, Lisa felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead might not always be easy, but they would walk it together as a family united by love, memory, and the endless possibilities of the future. The lazy days of summer had given way to the crisp air of autumn when Jake and Emily decided to embark on another exploration of the attic. Lisa, engrossed in preparing a hearty stew for dinner, barely registered their excited footsteps overhead. It wasn't until she heard a muffled thud, followed by hushed whispers, that she paused, wooden spoon in hand, listening intently. After a moment of silence, Jake's voice drifted down the stairs. "Mom, can you come up here for a sec? We found something." Wiping her hands on a dish towel, Lisa made her way up to the attic. The space, once a jumble of forgotten memories, had been transformed over the past months into a cozy retreat. Model airplanes hung from the rafters, and a small desk in the corner held their growing collection of aviation books. Jake and Emily were huddled over an old cardboard box, their heads close together as they rifled through its contents. As Lisa approached, she could see a scatter of photographs spread out on the floor around them. "What have you got there?" she asked, kneeling down beside them. Emily looked up, her eyes shining with excitement. "We found a bunch of Dad's old photos. Look, here he is in his flight school uniform." She held up a slightly faded photograph of a much younger Tom, his smile wide and carefree as he stood proudly in front of a small plane. Lisa felt her heart catch at the sight. It had been a while since she'd seen that particular smile, and the memory of it brought a bittersweet ache. Jake, meanwhile, was focused on another photo. "Mom, who's this guy with Dad? They're at some kind of air show or something." Lisa leaned in to get a better look. The photo showed Tom, a few years older than in the flight school picture, standing next to another young man. They both wore flight suits and were grinning widely, their arms thrown casually over each other's shoulders. A banner in the background proclaimed, "Midwest Regional Air Show, 1999. "I'm not sure," Lisa said, studying the unfamiliar face. "Your dad had a lot of friends in the aviation world. This must have been before we met." Emily peered at the photo. "He looks kind of familiar, doesn't he? Like I've seen him somewhere before." Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, you're right, but where?" As the children continued to pore over the photos, Lisa found her mind wandering. She realized with a start that there was still so much about Tom's past that she didn't know. So many stories he had never had the chance to share. "Hey," she said softly, drawing the children's attention. "What do you say we make a project out of this? We could put together an album, try to piece together some of the stories behind these photos." Jake's face lit up. "That's a great idea. Maybe we could ask Mr. Thompson if he recognizes anyone in the pictures." Emily nodded enthusiastically. "And we could write down what we remember about each photo, like we do in our letters to Dad." As they began to sort through the photos, arranging them chronologically as best they could, Lisa felt a mixture of emotions wash over her. There was joy in seeing Tom's life unfold through these snapshots, but also a deep sadness for all the stories left untold. One photo, in particular, caught her eye. It showed Tom standing in front of a hangar, his expression serious as he spoke to someone just out of frame. The date stamp placed it just a few months before his death. "I wonder what was happening here," Lisa mused aloud, tracing the line of Tom's face with her finger. Jake leaned in to look. "He doesn't look very happy," he observed. "I don't remember Dad ever looking like that." Lisa felt a flicker of unease. There was something about the photo that nagged at her, a sense that there was more to the story than met the eye. As they continued to sort through the photos, the mystery of the unnamed friend and the somber photo lingered in the back of Lisa's mind. She found herself wondering about the parts of Tom's life she had never known, the experiences and relationships that had shaped him before they met. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Lisa found herself back in the attic, staring at the photo of Tom and his unnamed friend. On an impulse, she flipped it over, her heart skipping a beat when she saw faded handwriting on the back. "Tom and Charlie, Midwest Regional Air Show 99, the start of something big." Charlie. The name rang a faint bell, but Lisa couldn't place it. She made a mental note to ask Mr. Thompson about it the next time they visited the airport. As she tucked the photo back into the box, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that they had stumbled upon something significant. These photos weren't just a window into Tom's past. They were pieces of a puzzle that she hadn't even known existed. Descending the attic stairs, Lisa paused. Looking back at the box of photos, she made a silent promise to herself, to Jake, and to Emily. They would uncover the stories behind these images, would piece together the parts of Tom's life that had remained hidden. It wouldn't be easy, and there might be difficult truths to face along the way, but they would do it together. As she slipped into bed that night, Lisa found herself reaching for her notebook once again. "Dear Tom," she wrote, "today we discovered a new chapter of your story. I hope you'll forgive us for prying, but your children deserve to know all of you, not just the parts we thought we knew. I promise you, we'll handle your memories with love and care. And maybe, just maybe, we'll uncover the man you were before you became the husband and father we knew and loved." Closing the notebook, Lisa felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she knew that whatever they discovered, it would only deepen their understanding of the man they had loved and lost. With that thought, she drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with images of young Tom, smiling and carefree, ready to take on the world. The following Saturday found Lisa, Jake, and Emily at the airport, earlier than usual for their monthly visit. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of jet fuel and the promise of adventure. As they made their way to Mr. Thompson's hangar, Lisa felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness churning in her stomach. Mr. Thompson greeted them with his usual warm smile, but his eyebrows raised in surprise at the old shoebox Jake was carrying. "What have you got there, young man?" he asked, curiosity evident in his voice. Jake glanced at Lisa, who gave him an encouraging nod. "We found some old photos of Dad," he explained, his voice a mix of excitement and hesitation. "We were hoping you might be able to help us identify some of the people in them." Mr. Thompson's eyes softened. "Well now, that sounds like a mighty fine project. Why don't we take a look?" They settled into the comfortable chairs in Mr. Thompson's small office, the box of photos between them. As Jake and Emily began to pull out photographs, Lisa found herself studying Mr. Thompson's face, watching for any flicker of recognition or surprise. It didn't take long. About halfway through the stack, Mr. Thompson's hand stilled over a particular photo, the one of Tom and his unnamed friend at the air show. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa leaned forward. "You recognize them?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. "That's your dad, of course," he said, pointing to Tom's smiling face. "And that's Charlie Reeves. They were quite the pair back in the day." Emily's eyes widened. "Charlie. We saw that name on the back of one of the photos. Who was he, Mr. Thompson?" The old pilot's eyes took on a faraway look. "Charlie was your dad's best friend and flying partner for years. They met in flight school, if I remember correctly. Inseparable, those two were." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. In all the years she had known Tom, he had never once mentioned a Charlie. "What happened to him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson's expression grew somber. "Now that's a complicated story, and one I'm not sure I should be the one to tell." Jake, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Please, Mr. Thompson, we want to know about Dad's life. All of it." The old pilot sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Well, I suppose you have a right to know, but you've got to understand. Sometimes good people make mistakes, and your dad, well, he was only human." Lisa felt her heart begin to race. "What kind of mistakes?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Mr. Thompson looked at each of them in turn, his expression grave. "Your dad and Charlie, they had big dreams. They wanted to start their own charter service, fly corporate bigwigs around the country. But starting a business like that takes money, and, well, they got mixed up with some folks they shouldn't have." Emily gasped softly. "You mean, like, bad people?" Mr. Thompson nodded. "Nothing too serious, mind you. But they were young and ambitious, and they made some poor choices. Your dad, he realized pretty quick that they were in over their heads. He wanted out, but Charlie thought they could make it work." Lisa felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. This was a side of Tom she had never known, never even suspected. "What happened then?" she asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Your dad did the right thing," Mr. Thompson said firmly. "He went to the authorities, told them everything. It caused quite a stir in the aviation community at the time. Charlie didn't take it well. Last I heard, he'd left the country, hasn't been seen around these parts in years." A heavy silence fell over the room. Lisa looked at Jake and Emily, seeing the shock and confusion on their faces that she knew must be mirrored on her own. Jake was the first to speak, his voice small and uncertain. "So, Dad was a hero? He stopped something bad from happening?" Mr. Thompson nodded. "That he did, son. Your dad made a mistake, but he owned up to it. Took responsibility. That's the mark of a true hero, in my book." As they left the airport that day, the box of photos feeling heavier than before, Lisa's mind was reeling. She had always thought she knew Tom completely, but now she realized there were depths to him she had never explored. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Lisa sat at the kitchen table, the photos spread out before her. She picked up the one of Tom and Charlie, studying their young, carefree faces. How had that friendship ended? What had it cost Tom to do the right thing? With trembling hands, she reached for her notebook. "Dear Tom," she wrote, "today we uncovered a part of your past I never knew existed. I find myself with so many questions, so many things I wish I could ask you. But more than anything, I find myself proud. Proud of the man you were, the choices you made, and the example you set for our children. We may not have known this part of your story before, but I promise you, we'll honor it. Your legacy of integrity and courage will live on through Jake and Emily. As she closed the notebook, Lisa felt a mix of emotions wash over her. There was sadness for the friendships lost, pride in Tom's integrity, and a renewed determination to uncover every facet of the man she had loved. Whatever other secrets lay hidden in those photos, whatever other stories remained untold, she knew that together, she and the children would face them. They would piece together the full picture of Tom's life, honoring both his triumphs and his struggles. With a deep breath, Lisa gathered up the photos, tucking them safely back into their box. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new discoveries. But for tonight, she would hold on to the image of young Tom, standing tall and proud, a man who had faced his mistakes and chosen to do what was right. It was that man, complex, flawed, and ultimately heroic, that she wanted Jake and Emily to know and remember. The revelation about Tom's past with Charlie had stirred up a whirlwind of emotions in the household. Jake and Emily, initially shocked, had begun to pepper Lisa with questions she couldn't answer. Their curiosity, once piqued, seemed insatiable. One rainy afternoon, as Lisa was sorting through some old papers in the study, Jake burst in, his eyes alight with excitement. "Mom, I found something." Lisa looked up, startled by his sudden entrance. "What is it, Jake?" He thrust a yellowed newspaper clipping under her nose. "I was doing some research online about Dad and Charlie, and I found this old article. Look." Lisa took the printout, her heart racing as she scanned the headline. "Local pilots involved in aviation scandal. Whistleblower comes forward." The article, dated nearly 2 decades ago, gave a brief account of a failed charter service and allegations of financial misconduct. Tom's name was mentioned as the whistleblower who had exposed the wrongdoing. "Jake," Lisa said slowly, "where did you find this?" "I was searching Dad's name in the newspaper archives at the library," Jake explained, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I thought maybe there'd be something about his flying days, you know? But then I found this." Lisa felt a mix of pride in Jake's initiative and apprehension about what other information might be out there. "Have you shown this to Emily?" Jake shook his head. "Not yet. I wanted to show you first. Do you think there's more to find out?" Lisa sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'm sure there is, sweetheart, but we need to be careful. Sometimes old stories can be complicated." As if on cue, Emily appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with curiosity. "What's going on? Did you find something about Dad?" Jake quickly filled her in, showing her the article. Emily's brow furrowed as she read. "So Charlie was the bad guy?" she asked, looking up at Lisa. Lisa shook her head. "It's not that simple, Em. People aren't just good or bad. Sometimes good people make mistakes." "But Dad fixed it," Jake interjected. "He told the truth." Lisa nodded, feeling a swell of pride. "Yes, he did, and that took a lot of courage." Emily was quiet for a moment, then spoke up. "I want to know more. About Dad, about Charlie, about all of it." Lisa looked at the determined faces of her stepchildren and made a decision. "All right," she said. "Let's see what else we can find out. But we do this together, okay? And we remember that, whatever we learn, your dad was a good man who loved you very much." Over the next few weeks, their investigation took on a life of its own. Jake threw himself into researching old newspaper articles and aviation forums. Emily, with her meticulous nature, created a timeline of events based on the information they gathered. Lisa reached out to some of Tom's old colleagues, piecing together bits of the story that hadn't made it into the official records. One Saturday, As they were compiling their findings in the attic, Jake made another breakthrough. "Look at this," he exclaimed, pointing to a name in an old flight log they'd found. "Senior Thompson's name is here, on the same day as one of Dad and Charlie's flights." Lisa leaned in, her heart racing. "You're right. I think it's time we had another talk with Mr. Thompson." The next day found them back at the airport, sitting across from Mr. Thompson in his small office. The old pilot's face was grave as they shared their discoveries. "I was hoping you wouldn't dig too deep into this," he said with a sigh. "But I suppose the truth was bound to come out eventually." "Mr. Thompson," Lisa said gently, "we need to know, for Tom's sake, for the kids, what really happened." The old pilot was quiet for a long moment, then began to speak. "Your dad and Charlie, they were good boys, ambitious, maybe too ambitious. They got mixed up with some investors who promised them the moon. But those investors, they were using the charter service to move some, let's say, less than legal cargo." Jake and Emily exchanged wide-eyed glances as Mr. Thompson continued. "Your dad figured it out first. He came to me, scared out of his wits. I advised him to go to the authorities, which he did. But Charlie thought they could handle it themselves, make it right without involving the law." "What happened to Charlie?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson's eyes were sad. "Last I heard, he was living somewhere in South America. Never faced charges, but his flying days were over." As they left the airport that day, Lisa felt the weight of this new knowledge settling on her shoulders. She looked at Jake and Emily, seeing the mix of emotions on their faces, pride in their father's integrity, sadness for the friendship lost, and a new understanding of the complexities of adult life. That night, as Lisa wrote in her notebook, she found herself addressing not just Tom, but Charlie as well. "I wish I had known you both," she wrote. "Known the dreams you shared, the mistakes you made, the choices that tore you apart. Tom, I'm proud of the man you became, the father you were to our children. And Charlie, wherever you are, I hope you found peace." As she closed the notebook, Lisa felt a sense of closure, but also a new beginning. They had uncovered a crucial part of Tom's past, but she knew there was still more to learn, more ways to honor his memory and help Jake and Emily understand the complex, courageous man their father had been. With a deep breath, Lisa made a silent promise to both Tom and the children. They would continue to uncover the truth, to piece together the full story of Tom's life. And in doing so, they would forge a stronger bond as a family, united by their shared quest to understand and honor the man they had loved and lost.